2001 Space Odyssey, Arthur C. Clarke. Chapter 4, The Leopard. The tools they had been programmed to use were simple enough, yet they could change this world and make the man-made its master. The most primitive was the handheld stone that multiplied manifold the power of the blow. Then there was the bone claw and lengthened the reach and could provide a buffer against the fang or claws of angry animal. With these weapons, the limitless fur and roam the savannah was theirs to take. But they needed other aids, for their teeth and nails could not readily dismember anything larger than a rabbit. Luckily, nature had provided perfect tools, requiring only the wit to pick them up. First, there was a crude but very efficient knife or saw of a model that would serve well for the next 3 million years. It was simply the lower jawbone of the antelope, with the teeth still in place. There would be no substantial improvement until the coming of steel. Then there was an old dagger in the form of a gazelle horn, and finally a scraping tool made from the complete jaw of almost any small animal. The stone club, the toothed saw, the horn dagger, the bone scraper, these were the marvelous inventions which the man-apes needed in order to survive. Soon they would recognize them for the symbols of power that they were, but many months must pass before their clumsy fingers had acquired the skill or the will to use them. Perhaps, given time, they might be their own efforts have come to the awesome and brilliant concept of using natural weapons as artificial tools. But the odds were all against them, and even now there were endless opportunities for failure in the age they lay ahead. The man-apes had been given their first chance. There would be no second one. The future was very literally in their own hands. Moon waxed and waned. Babies were born and sometimes lived. Feeble, toothless, 30-year-old died. The leopard took its toll in the night. The others threatened daily across the river, and the tribe prospered. In the course of the single year, Moonwatcher and his companion had changed almost beyond recognition. They had learned their lesson well. Now they could handle all the tools that had been revealed to them. The very memory of a hunter was fading from their minds, and though its warthog were becoming shy, there were gazelles and antelopes and zebras in countless thousands on the plains. All these animals and others had fallen prey to the apprentice hunters. Now that they were no longer half-numbed with starvation, they had time both for leisure and for the first rudiment of thought. Their new way of life was now casually accepted, and they did not associate it in any ways either monoliths still standing beside the trail to the river. If they had ever stopped to consider the matter, they might have boasted that they had brought about their improved status by their own efforts. In fact, they had already forgotten any other mode of existence. But no utopia is perfect, and this one had two blemishes. The first was the marauding leopard, whose passion for man-apes seemed to have grown even stronger now that they were better nourished. The second was the tribe across the river, for somehow the others had survived and had stubbornly refused to die of starvation. The leopard problem was resolved partly by chance, partly owing to a serious, indeed almost fatal, error on Moonwatcher's part. Yet, at the time, his idea seemed such a brilliant one that he had danced with joy, and perhaps he could hardly be blamed for overlooking the consequence. The tribe still experienced occasionally bad days, though these no longer threatened in its very survival. Toward dusk, it had failed to make a kill. The home caves were already in sight, and Moonwatcher led his tired and disgruntled companion back to shelter. And there, on their very threshold, they found one nature rare bonanza. A full-grown antelope was lying in the trail. Its foreleg was broken, but it still had plenty of fight in it. The circling jackals gave dagger-like horns a respectable buzz. They could afford to wait. They knew that they had only to bide their time. But they had forgotten about competition and retreated with angry snarls, and the men waves arrived. They too circled warily, keeping beyond the range of those dangerous horns. Then they moved to the attack with clubs and stones. It was not a very effective or coordinated attack. By the time the wretched beast had give its quietus, the light had almost gone, and the jackal were regaining their courage. Moonwatcher, torn between fear and hunger, slowly realized that all this effort might have been in vain. It was too dangerous to stay here any longer. Then, not for the first and the last time, he proved himself a genius. With the immense effort of imagination, he visualized the dead antelope in the safety in his own cave. He began to drag it toward the cliff face. Presently, the others understood his attention and began to help him. If he had known how difficult the task would be, he would never have attempted. Only his great strength and agility inherited from a warrior ancestor allowed him to haul the carcass up to steep slope, several times weeping with frustration. He almost abandoned his prize, but stubbornness, as deep-seated as his hunger drove him on. Sometimes the others helped him, sometimes they hindered, often more they merely got in the way. But finally it was done. The battered antelope was dragged over the roof of the cave. At the last hue of the sunlight faded from the sky, and the fasting began. I was late, gorged to repletion, Moonwatcher awake. Not knowing why, he sat up in the darkness among the swelled bodies of his equally satisfied companion and strained his ears into the night. There were no sounds except the heavy breathing around him. The whole world seemed asleep. The rock beyond the mouths of the cave were pale as bone in the brilliant light from the moon, now high overhead. Any sort of danger seemed infinitely remote. Then, from a long way up, came a sound of falling pebble, fearful, yet inquisitive. Moonwatcher crawled out onto the edge of the cave and peered down the face of the cliff. What he saw left him so paralyzed with fright that for long seconds he was unable to move. Only 20 feet below, two gleaming golden eyes were staring straight up at him. They held him so hypnotized with fear, and he was scarcely aware of the light streaked body behind them, following smoothly and silently from rock to rock. Never before had the leopard climbed so high. It has ignored the lower caves, though it must have been well aware of their inhabitants. Now it was after other game. It was following the spur of blood of the mountain-washed face of the cliff. Scanned right. The light was made hideous by the shriek of alarm from the man-apes of the cave above. The leopard gave a snarl of fury as it realized that it had lost the element of surprise. But it did not check in advance, for it knew that it had nothing to fear. It reached the ledge, the rest for a moment on the narrow open space. The scent of blood was all around, filling its fierce and tiny mind with one overwhelming desire. Without hesitation, he padded silently into the cave. And here it made its first error. As it moved out of the moonlight, even its superbly night-adapted eyes were at a momentary disadvantage. The man-apes could see it, partly silhouetted against the opening of the cave more clearly than it could see them. They were terrified, but they were no longer utterly helpless. Snarling and lashing its tail in arrogant confidence, the leopard advanced in search of a tender food that it craved. Had it met its prey in the open, it would have had no problem. But now that the man-apes were trapped, desperation had given them the courage to attempt the impossible. And for the first time, they had the means to achieve it. The leopard knew that something was wrong when it felt a stunning blow on its head. It lashed out its fore. He heard a shriek of agony, and its claws slashed through a soft flesh. Then there was a piercing pain as something sharp drove into its flank once or twice, and the third time it whirled around the strike to the shadow streaming and dancing all one side. Again there was a violent blow as something caught it across the snout. The teeth snapped on a white moving blur only the great uselessly upon dead bone. And now its final unbelievable indignity. Its tail was being dragged out by the roots. It whirled around, throwing its insanely daring tremental against the wall of the cave. Yet, whatever it did, it could not escape the rain of blows inflicted on it by crude efforts wielded by clumsy but powerful hands. It snarled and the gamut from the pain of alarm, from alarm to owl-like terror. The implacable hunter was now the victim and was desperately trying to retreat. And then it made the second mistake, for in its surprise and fright, it had forgotten where it was, or perhaps it had been dazzled and blinded by the blows rained on its head. Whatever the case, it bolted abruptly from the cave. There was a horrible screech as it went toppling out into space. Way later, it seemed there came a thud as it crashed into an outcropping halfway down the cliff. Thereafter, the only sound was the sliding of losing stones, which quickly died away into the night. From a long time, intoxicated over victory, Bunocha stood dancing and gibbering at the entrance of the cave. He rightly sensed that his whole world had changed and that he had no longer a powerless victim of the forces around him. Then he went back to the cave and for the first time in his life had an unbroken night's sleep. In the morning, they found the body of the leopard at the foot of the cliff. Even the death, it was some time before anyone dared to approach the vanquished monster, but presently they closed in upon it with their bone, knives, and swords. It was very hard work, and they did no hunting that day.